Welcome to Tribe Radio, the only radio podcast you need to unplug yourself from the Matrix. My name is Robin, just like the bird, I'm your host. And in this exclusive interview, I have been honored to be able to have a conversation with Toine Manders, the leader of the Dutch Libertarian Party in the Netherlands. Now, Toine is a very honorable and wise man. He has been fighting against the system for a very long time, which means he has lots to tell. My intention during this interview was to ignite a conversation that resonates and at the same time leaves a lasting impact on our viewers to inspire you on your path towards an independent life. Because freedom is not something you ask for. You have to take it. Just like the butterfly doesn't ask to use its own wings. Are you prepared to embark on this journey with me? Then let's break the internet. Welcome to another exclusive interview of the Tribe Radio. I have a very special guest who invited me in his office in Eindhoven. Toine, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
You're welcome.
I've been looking forward for almost 3 years already, right now. We already spoke a little bit about that while we were lunching. I have a little list here of questions that we can use as a guideline during our conversation.
Far away.
Okay. Well, maybe you would like to start with presenting yourself a little bit to our audience.
Sure. Okay, well, my name is Toine Manders. I am a tax advisor. I advise mostly business owners, but also other people, how to minimize their tax burden. So it's mostly tax planning, minimizing income tax, corporate income tax, inheritance tax. And I also advise my clients on how to better protect their wealth, on estate planning, on migration to countries that have lower taxes and more freedom. I also advise my clients with regard to optimizing their business structure. And I grew up here, not far from here, in the southeast of the Netherlands. Born and raised here. Then I went to law school in Amsterdam, the University of Amsterdam. Then I started my first job, which was advising military draftees on how to avoid the military draft.
Interesting.
I'd been drafted myself. When I was very young and not aware of the possibility of avoiding the draft. I served most of my military time in Germany. So that was my first bit of experience of living abroad. But when I got the opportunity to take a job to advise draftees on how to avoid the military draft, I accepted it right away because it was very consistent with my philosophy. Ever since as long as I can remember, I've always had this view that if people want to forbid me to do things I want to do, or force me to do things I don't want to do, then they better have good arguments. And if they want to tell me their arguments, I'm happy to listen to them, evaluate their arguments. If I agree with them, if they can convince me, then I'll happily oblige. However, if they don't have any arguments or at least none that can convince me, then I see no reason why I should go against my own value judgments and bow to the will of another person. So that view, which I would describe as a libertarian view, is one I've had as long as I can remember, and it has led to some sort of conflicts with my father and with school teachers and other authority figures in the army as well, of course.
I can imagine, yeah.
When I was about 10 years old, I had to give a speech in front of my class. And I was allowed to pick my own topic. And the topic I picked was the United States of America. And I went to the school library and started reading books about the United States. And the information I got from those school books in the 1970s in this Dutch school was that the United States was an extremely free country with a lot of freedoms, including freedom of speech, which in the United States is probably the best protected of any country in the world. You can even lie about the government, and you cannot be prosecuted for lying about the things the government does.
You make me think of something. Parlement in French, the parliament, actually means speaking and lying. Parler, mentir.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The freedom to keep and bear arms, which I consider an extremely important freedom, because as most people probably will not know, in the course of the 20th century, the government killed about 262 million of its subjects. So they were murdered by their own governments outside of war, just as a matter of government policy. And usually the pattern is first the government disarms the people it intends to murder, and after they've been disarmed, then they murder them in that order, which makes perfect sense, of course, from the government's perspective. That's one reason, the reason why I'm very, very much opposed to gun control and very strongly support the right to keep and bear arms. I mean, if the Jews had their own guns, if they hadn't been disarmed, then the outcome of the Holocaust might have been a bit different. At least they would have had a fighting chance, what they didn't have now.
Yeah.
One reason why Hitler didn't invade Switzerland is probably that the Swiss are armed to the teeth. And well trained. They train 2 weeks out of the year. And then the other 50 weeks they take their military rifle home and take the munition home as well.
Plus their localization is really really well, I mean, they have bunkers, they live in the mountains. It's very difficult to strategically get inside, right?
Exactly.
As a foreigner.
I think the best protection against tyranny is not a piece of paper called a constitution. I think the best protection is to live in an area where there's a lot of people who really care about their freedoms and who are well armed and well trained. Even very powerful armies cannot win a guerrilla war. I mean, the United States could not win the war in Vietnam, even though it was by far the most powerful army in the world. The French couldn't win the war in Algeria. The Soviet Union could not win the war in Afghanistan, because if there's a large number of people who are well armed and well trained and are not willing to accept being subjected, being tyrannized, then you can't win the war. So I think that is the best guarantee of your freedom, is to live in a place like that. So that's why I wholeheartely support the right to keep and bear arms.
Something that is taken away from us in Europe. It's a big contrast with America.
That's right, especially.
What is your vision on that? How would you see? Would it be possible in the future, do you think, for citizens to have their own arms and defend themselves?
Well, it would be great, but the government doesn't just steal our money through taxation, but it also uses a large chunk of that money to subsidize government schools and universities and pay the salaries of teachers and professors, and forces parents to deliver their children to the government schools at usually around 8:30 in the morning. And if you don't take your kids to government schools at 8:30 in the morning, they put you in jail. So you have to take them to the government schools. And then through the whole day there, they will be propagandized. They will be taught the things the government wants the teachers to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, well, I mean, this is not new. I mean, our parents have gone to government schools. Our grandparents have gone to government schools. Even our great-grandparents went to government schools. It's been going on, well, since the late 19th century, basically, when most of the Western countries started imposing this the so-called compulsory attendance.
Yeah.
And there's an old Dutch saying, whose bread one eats, whose word one speaks. In English, the phrase would be, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. It's very hard to make a man understand something if his salary depends on his not understanding it.
Yeah.
And I mean, everybody knows that in dictatorships, the powers that be are extremely interested in what the teachers teach the kids. And teachers who are critical of government, that usually doesn't end well. If they're lucky, they just get fired. If they're not so lucky, they get sent off to a concentration camp or are killed. And everybody realizes at some level why that is. The reason is simply because when people are young, they tend to believe what they're taught. So if the government has influence on what the teachers teach our children, then they have a huge impact on public opinion. For instance, most Buddhists are Buddhists because their parents are Buddhists, and their teachers were Buddhists, and the people around them were Buddhists, so they've become Buddhists. Most Hindus are Hindus because their parents were Hindus, and their teachers were Hindus, and the people around them were Hindus, so they became Hindus. But this is not typical of Buddhism, Hinduism. This is true for every religion, every philosophy, and every worldview, and every political view too. Most people tend to believe what they're taught when they're young. And some of these people, when they grow, well, when they become teenagers or they're in their 20s, they're still open to new ideas. And then some of them will then start thinking for themselves and may decide that what they've been taught is wrong and adopt another philosophy. But this is rare. This is usually a small minority of the people. Most people just stick with what they've been taught. And once people are become older, like older than 25, then the number of people that's still open to new ideas, that shrinks drastically. It's very rare for a person in his 30s or 40s or 50s or older to admit, okay, everything I believe my whole life is wrong, I was completely mistaken, and I'm going to change my worldview.
Yeah, but
it happens, but it's very rare.
Yeah, but it's happening more and more often.
Yes.
It looks like,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even in formerly communist countries, about a third of the elderly people who were born and raised under communism and went to communist schools and were taught communism since childbirth, about a third of these people still vote for communists in many countries. And if you ask them why, they'll say, well, things used to be better back then. Which is absurd because, I mean, they had to wait in line for an hour and a half for a loaf of bread, for a few bananas. They had to, if they wanted to buy a fridge, they had to spend 6 nights in a sleeping bag in front of a store just on the hunch that maybe the rumor was right, that they would be delivered. If they wanted a car, they had to wait 10 years, and then they didn't get a car, but they got a moped filled with cardboard around it. And when East Germany fell, when the East German communist regime fell, the Stasi, the East German security police, Staatssicherheitsdienst, when they knew they were going to lose their power, they shredded their files, which was huge because they had files on everyone. And about 1/3 of the East Germans were spies working for the Stasi. Mm-hmm. So they had these huge files, and they shredded them all. And then after they left and communism fell, there were volunteers who put them all together again and used computer software to decipher them. And when that was successful, then the East Germans were allowed to make an appointment and go read their own Stasi files. And there would be they would employ staff there who to give moral support and psychological support to the people who just read their own files, because what they would usually find, they would find out who had been spying on them, which usually included many of their friends, many of their relatives, and often included their own spouse. So after this happened, there were millions of divorces in East Germany, because the people realized that they'd been spying on not by their colleagues, not by their nephews, but by their own spouse. And the people they just said goodbye to in the morning, when they went to go to their appointment with at the former Stasi office to read their Stasi file, And then they found out that that very spouse had been spying on them. And so they couldn't trust anyone anymore, is what they discovered. And this is what communist countries were like. And for people to say things were better then, that's absurd. But that's what they will tell you, because that's how they were born and raised. And a lot of people have a great amount of difficulty to admit that they were completely wrong. Even though their kids and grandkids are now have decent supermarkets where they actually have food on the shelves, the kids and grandkids actually have decent cars instead of Wartburgs and Trabants. Their kids and don't have to worry about being spied upon by their spouses and their friends and neighbors and relatives.
No, now it's Big Brother.
I mean, yes, things are not perfect now, but they were a lot worse then. If we're talking about the days of the Soviet Union.
Have you seen the interview with Putin and Tucker Carlson?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
What was your opinion?
To finish my previous point.
Yeah.
You asked me, wouldn't it be great if we would have the freedom to keep and bear arms here in the Netherlands? Mm-hmm. And yes, it's great. But I think that probably 98% of the Dutch population has been taught that the freedom to keep and bear arms is a crazy lunatic idea, and that in countries that have this, there are constant mass shootings and people constantly get killed and murdered, and there's mass shootings at schools and cinemas, and that's what we would get here if we had the freedom to keep and bear arms here. And they believe it because it's been taught to them in school. They believe it because it's been taught to them in the media,
in the television, television.
Yeah, and if you try to explain to them that this is completely wrong, they don't believe you. Mm-hmm. When I tell people, okay, mass shootings are actually more common in Europe than in the United States. If you count the number of people that get killed in mass shootings as a percentage, like the number of people that get killed per million per year on average, countries like Norway and France are much worse than the United States. Well, Norway, there was one guy that shot 69 people, 69 school children, and nobody stopped him because nobody had guns. The only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. But in countries that do not have the right to keep and bear arms, there's usually no good guy with a gun around. So bad people can just shoot as many people as they like. Yeah. In France, we had a mass shooting not that long ago in Paris.
Well, now even in Den Haag, there's rebellions, etc. between the what was the tribals called?
From Eritrea, you mean?
Eritrea,
yeah. So if you look at Europe, we have mass shootings too, but they don't get attributed to the right to keep and bear arms because you don't have it. Mm-hmm. But the point, of course, is that if you disarm peaceful people, if you disarm honest people, criminals are not going to give up their guns. They're going to keep them. So the only result is if guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. And the rest of us are defenseless. That's the result. Yeah. Switzerland has, in every family in Switzerland that has a healthy male under the age of 55, there is a gun in the home, a military gun and ammunition. The homicide rate in Switzerland is very low. The burglary rate is extremely low. Of course, you'd be crazy to be a burglar in Switzerland when you know that it's likely that your victim is going to be armed.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in south of France, and there we have lots of farmers.
Yeah.
Every farmer has his shotgun above the chimney,
Right.
And we just know don't fuck with the farmers. That's that's how it works. And what I would like to tell about this, and what you also spoke about within other episodes in other podcasts. You said that the government has monopoly over violence. Could you explain that? Because there is a connection with the fact that citizens cannot defend themselves and the government can defend them, but will not always use it for the right benefit.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah, it's a matter of definition. The most widely accepted definition of government is an organization that claims a monopoly on the use of force, the use of violence within a given territory. Not only claims it, but also tries to enforce it, and usually does successfully. And as a result, typically in most countries, almost everyone that has a gun is either a soldier or a policeman, and the rest of the population is usually not armed, which is a big risk. Because Hayek wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom, where he described how usually the worst people get on top. And in dictatorships, this is not disputed. Most people will gladly admit that in dictatorships, it's the worst people that are in power. Because they're the ones that want it the most. They're power hungry. So usually power is grabbed by the power hungry. A decent person usually is not power hungry and doesn't grab the power. And in democracies, a lot of people are more naive and believe that the powers that are in control of us in democracies are all well-intentioned. That may sometimes be true, but it doesn't have to be the case. There are a lot of democracies that have murdered a lot of people. Usually they're not in their own country. Usually they kill people in other countries. Mm-hmm. Usually the kind of powers that kill the people in their own country are dictatorships. That is true. So places like the Soviet Union, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia. Usually when those 262 million people that were murdered by their own governments, those are usually dictatorships, usually not democracies. Democracies usually shoot people, murder people in other countries. But they almost all of them, not all of them, but most of them do murder people that mean no harm, that are innocent, that do not attack us, are no threat to us. So it was Thomas Jefferson who said that government, like fire, is a fearful servant and a powerful master. I probably messed up that quote, but his point was the problem with government is it is the concentration of power. A very small group of people has an extreme amount of power. And power corrupts. And as a result, we should be very careful not to give too much power to too few people, because that is a recipe for disaster. It can go well for a long time, but it can also very quickly go wrong. Look at Germany. Germany, until the 1920s, was considered a very civilized country. Deutsch ist die Sprache der Dichter und Denker. There were a lot of famous philosophers were Germans. A lot of academics were Germans. They have contributed to science and to technology in many ways. It was a highly civilized country. Mm-hmm. And if prior to World War I, prior to 1914, you had predicted that in less than 20 years, Germany would become a dictatorship that would murder millions of people and not just start wars and murder people abroad, but murder its own subjects. Well, then people would not have believed you, but it happened, and it happened and that changed very quickly in just a few years.
Yeah, and our media is saying the same thing about Putin, for example. Yeah. I have a very different opinion about what is happening during this so-called war. I see it as a strategy for, let's say, the little group that you were talking about. They're creating a new system. Before they can do that, they have to create chaos. Ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. This is what they do.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah, divide and conquer. They have been doing this for thousands of years. So they are very strategically, they are masters. And this is also one of the reasons why I really wanted to sit down with you, because I've heard your visions. I know that you have lots of knowledge to share about our true history. and also about how governments function. And like my mission is the butterfly tribe, and the butterfly tribe, like I said during our little lunch, is actually the new world that I would like to create. So instead of focusing ourselves on all the problems, let's have a look at all the solutions. And I think what I want to offer to the world is a way that we can live freely and maybe start creating a new world. But of course, there is so many transformative steps you have to take on a spiritual level, a physical level, financial level, educational, we just said. So there are so many things, but like I said, I have some questions that maybe could relate to that, and I would really love to have your vision on, okay, how can people really become independent from the system? So let's see. So I wrote down, how do you envision the transition from the current totalitarian regime to a society where individuals possess true autonomy over their lives?
Okay, let me start off by saying that every government is a criminal organization. Every government consists of the same principle, which is we have a class society with two classes. There's the ruling class and there are the subjects. And the members of the ruling class claim the right to order us around, to give us orders. And they believe that we, the subjects, have an obligation to obey them, to obey their orders. And if we don't obey them, they will lock us in cages. Furthermore, the members of the ruling class believe that they have the right to be paid for their disservices, which they consider services. And they unilaterally decide how much they want to get paid, and then they send us letters telling us how much was. Well, first they make us tell them how much money we made, then they send us letters telling us how much we owe them, and if we don't pay, they lock us in cages. That's true of all governments anywhere. So they're all tyrannical in a way, and they're all criminal organizations, but they're not equally bad. There are huge differences among these governments. The probably worst government in the world currently is probably North Korea, where even family members get punished very, very severely for victimless crimes of their family members. So that's probably the absolute lowest form of government on the planet, the worst tyranny. But there are also places that are a lot freer. There are places in the world like Liechtenstein and Andorra and Florida that in different ways still have a lot of freedoms. They're not perfect. There is no perfectly free place in the world, but they are different. They're a lot freer. There are places that are a lot freer and places that are a lot less free. And I think that here in Western Europe, I think that, in a way I'm sad to say, this is probably one of the better places in the world, Western Europe. I think that most Western European countries are probably among the most free, which doesn't say much for the rest of the world. So much of the rest of the world is still even worse. I'm not saying that it's great here, not saying we're perfectly free, not at all. There's a lot of problems that we have, a lot of liberties that are taken from us, and we certainly pay very high taxes, but I don't think that if you move to a random other country, things are going to be better. They're probably going to be worse. There are better places, and I think it's a great idea for an individual to vote with your feet. Pick the place that has the most freedom, especially with regard to the freedoms that matter most to you, and move there, absolutely. But there are freer places. I think most places are probably even less free. That's a point I wanted to make. And I wanted to say this because you used the word totalitarian. I think if we're not careful, we might be headed that way. I don't think we're there yet. We're not totalitarian yet. Because I think that the regimes that are truly totalitarian and that have been in the past are still a lot worse. So I do think it's important to distinguish.
Of course, if we compare to other regimes.
Yes.
Little question. Are you enjoying this interview as much as I do? Awesome. Then click on the thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. And make sure to share this video with other like-minded individuals. This way our community can grow and we can inspire more people. Now that we have a little break, I wanted to remind you that if you want to become part of our tribe, you can go to my website, thebutterflytribe.io, and you can create an account on our community platform. This way you can get in contact with like-minded individuals. If you want to get in contact with Toine, for example, you can consider to join our inner circle, because Toine is also part of our inner circle. But if you do not feel ready to commit yet, you can still get in touch with Toine on his LinkedIn profile. You will find it underneath this video. Okay, that's all. Now let's go back to the interview.
Okay, so you asked me what can we do to have more freedom?
Yeah, within a totalitarian regime, but that's my extreme pronunciation.
That's fine. So as an individual, I think probably the best thing to do is to vote with your feet, to move to another country that has more freedom, especially the freedoms you value most. And that's actually part of my job, is to help clients find which country is most suitable for them.
Do you have a list of countries? Like
yes.
Primarily, you don't have to make the whole list, but...
Yes, of course. Yeah, so a lot of people want to stay in Europe because they want to be able to fly back to the Netherlands to see their friends and family or customers. So if you want to stay within Europe and you want to pay lower taxes and you want sunny winters and warm winters, then the best countries are usually Malta and Cyprus. Portugal and Italy used to be pretty good until last January 1st. Now they're not so great, but they still have something to offer.
Why aren't they so great?
Well, I mean, prior to January 1st, if you move to Italy, to the south of Italy, as a...
expat or?
Yeah, as an expat, and you still need to work for your money, then you could get a 90% exemption. So 90% of your income, of your labor income or income from your business, would be exempt from tax. Now it's 50%, which is still not bad, still interesting, but it used to be 90%, which was great. So Italy used to be wonderful. Now it's okay. In the south of Italy, it used to be 70%. Oh, sorry, the north of Italy used to be 70% exemption. Now it's a 50% exemption. Now it doesn't matter anymore whether you go to the north or the south of Italy. It's 50% exemption either way. Portugal used to have this great arrangement where, before January 1st, where you used to be able to enjoy income from dividends, tax-free, for 10 years, and you would pay 20% income tax on your labor income. That regime has now basically disappeared. It's just a few occupations like professor. There's a very few a small list of occupations to qualify for it. But if you receive a lot of dividends, then Portugal could still be used. You would have to do some juggling, you might say, but it's still possible. As for Malta and Cyprus, they're still great places. So especially, I mean, their taxes are low even for their own people, for their own citizens. But for foreigners, they're even better. So if you live in Cyprus as a foreigner, you pay zero tax on dividends. You pay zero tax on royalties. You pay zero tax on interest. You pay zero tax on capital gains unless it's Cypriot real estate. There's no inheritance tax, there's no gift tax. If you start a business, the business pays 12.5% tax, and then you can take the dividends tax-free. So it's a great place. If you work abroad, you can usually make that money tax-free. So yeah, it has a lot to offer. And Malta is even better in many ways, because there you can start a business and pay 5% tax on your profits effectively.
Mhm.
So that's and therefore all foreign source income is tax free unless you're remitted to Malta. But if you don't, then it's tax free. And foreign capital gains can be remitted tax free. So it's these are great places from a tax perspective. Plus, everybody speaks English. It used to be British colonies, so you don't have to learn to speak Maltese or Greek. You can just get by perfectly well with English. You can even communicate with the government in English. You can send them letters in English and get a response in English. So it's most people are not that aware of these two countries, Malta and Cyprus, but they're actually the most interesting in Europe.
And also still for offshore bank accounting?
Banking is difficult anywhere these days, especially if you're an expat, especially if you work internationally or trade internationally. It's become a lot harder than it used to be, but it's not impossible. You can still do it, and that goes for these countries too. There are some places in Eastern Europe that are usually of interest of people who don't make a lot of money but still want to save on their taxes, and they usually want to save on their cost of living as well. And for these people, places like Slovenia, Bulgaria, Georgia, Romania are great because they didn't just save on their taxes, which are quite a lot lower, especially if you're an expat. But the cost of living is a lot cheaper too, so you save money in two ways. And these days, of course, a lot of people are working remotely, so they can just keep doing the same work they're doing in their home country. If they can work remotely from behind their computers, then they can do the work anywhere, including a country that has low taxes and a low cost of living.
Yeah. I've been in Malta 2-3 weeks ago just to explore a little bit. I made some connections with locals over there. They said that the housing prices for locals are getting pretty expensive because of all the Indian people who are coming over there for cheap labor, which is then taking over the housing market, which makes it more expensive for locals to live there. I also heard from a lawyer over there. We had a great time dancing around the campfires and making music, etc. We had a conversation, and she said to me that there are all other alternatives, like for example Wyoming, and there was another country in America or province that also do legal structures where you do not pay any taxes for foreigners. Do you know this?
Yeah, of course. So in most U.S. states, you can set up an LLC, a limited liability company.
Yeah.
That is transparent for tax purposes. And if you don't live in America, if you don't work there, if you don't have a business there, if you have no trade or business there, so the only connection is basically the LLC, and that's it. Then yeah, it's true. Then the LLC doesn't pay tax in the U.S. You don't pay tax in the U.S. either. So you can use an LLC, an American LLC in that way. However, if you want to live in America, then in most states, taxes are a lot lower than they are in Europe. Florida, the state that I picked, has the lowest taxes in America, and of all the, if you want to live in a large industrial country that has a high standard of living, and it's not a small state, a miniature state or an island, then probably Florida is your best bet, especially if you want to be in an English-speaking country. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, taxes it's not the lowest tax place in the world. There are zero tax havens, like Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. There is no income tax. There is no inheritance tax or gift tax. There's no wealth tax. There's no capital gains tax. There are no mandatory national insurance premiums. None of these things exist. So you can truly live tax-free if you live in the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
So that's even better.
But starting out is a little bit expensive. I heard around 25K.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, real estate is not cheap in the UAE, and services tend to be very cheap because there's a lot of cheap labor because they have how shall I put this? They have a policy where anybody that can find a job can also get a work permit and a residence permit. And as a result, 90% of the population is now foreigners. The Emirati are just 10% of the population. They're a small minority. So if you start a business there, you can bring in staff from anywhere you want. You can get staff from China or Russia or India or the Philippines or wherever you want. So it's a great place to do business. Its business climate is excellent. The burden of taxes is low, but the burden of regulation is also very low. So I can highly recommend it for any business owners out there. If this part of the world seems of interest to you, check it out because it has a lot to offer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for this very broad answer, because we go from one question, we see so many topics because there's so much we could discuss also during this little podcast. Mm-hmm. We only have 1 hour. Yeah. So let's see, maybe I have some other questions. Like for instance, I really would like to have your vision on boycotting the whole system, as it were. Like what I try to do with the Butterfly Tribe is we now have an inner circle, mm-hmm. and this is sort of the private community in which we give people the tools to become independent on all levels, financially, spiritually, the knowledge, health-like, also, be in good shape and physical form. What is your vision about creating this new world? Like for instance, having a taxless space in which entrepreneurs can work together.
Well, it already exists. It's called Dubai. It's called the UAE. There already is a taxless space.
Yeah.
And it's not unique in the world. There are other places where that is also true. There's about 20 zero tax havens in the world, and most of them are either in the Persian Gulf or they are in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Like the Bahamas is also zero tax. The Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, the Turks and Caicos Islands, St. Kitts and Nevis, they're all zero tax havens.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, most of the Gulf states are zero tax havens too. Mm-hmm. There's a few in the South Pacific. So it's in Monaco is the only one in Europe, but it's extremely expensive in terms of real estate and cost of living. So for most people, it's not an option. But we have one in Europe.
Yeah.
Andorra used to be zero tax. Now it's 10%, which is still pretty good compared to most other countries. But it used to be zero. So yeah, it's.
And from the perspective of people who do not have, let's say, lots of capital to begin with,
Yeah.
You have to start somewhere.
Yes. Well, if you start out, if you are just starting and you don't have a lot of capital and don't have a lot of profits, and you want to move to a country where you will pay less tax and be able to grow faster and save your cost of living and therefore be able to grow faster and so forth, then maybe the UAE is not the best place to start because real estate is not that cheap, cost of living is not that low, and to get started you have to start a company that will employ you. So you basically create your own employer by setting up a company that will then hire you as its employee, and therefore you can get a residence permit. Mm-hmm. But that takes some startup capital, probably about 10,000 euros or so to start it up. So if that's too much, then you might want to start in a country that has not just low taxes, but a low cost of living too, like Georgia, like Romania, Bulgaria, like Slovenia.
Yeah.
These are places that would be a better first, if it's your first move, maybe that's a good place to start, because then you can save on your tax and cost of living, build up some more capital, and once you have more capital, you could then move to a place like a UAE, where it's completely zero tax.
I'm planning on exploring these countries myself.
Yeah.
I've done some research, and this year I would like to start maybe backpacking and take the podcast on the road, and visiting these countries to see all the possibilities over there,
Yeah.
and also the culture. I mean, I from my own experience, I had less stress in my life in south of France than in the Netherlands, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
But that's me,
Yeah.
There's so many people, so many cars everywhere. Everything is super expensive. There are so many rules as well,
Yeah.
That's something that we have less.
Yeah.
When you go more in the south, it's
Yeah.
more like, outgoing,
Yeah.
do your thing, and the government is, is always on the background. But
Yeah.
here in the Netherlands, I have the feeling that the government is, boom, in front of your nose.
Yeah, you were close to the Mediterranean there. That probably played a part.
Yeah.
I lived in Cyprus for a while, and I had
Mhm.
an office there for many years. And what I found is it's not just that the burden of regulation is lower, there are fewer rules. Another advantage is they don't take the rules all that seriously. For instance, in Cyprus there is a law that you need to wear a helmet if you ride a motorcycle. But half the people don't do it. And they just they ride around their motorcycles without a helmet.
Mhm.
There's a wee police car in front of them. In Cyprus, the police cars usually have their lights on, even if they're not in a hurry. That's sort of their thing. They want to show themselves off. I don't know what it is. And they just will pass a police car. They must see it because it has its lights on, without a helmet, and they don't get pulled over because the police don't care. And there's one example that it's not just how many rules they have, it's also how strictly are the rules enforced. And if even the police don't enforce those silly rules, then well, that's a form of freedom too. And if you there's all these international comparisons that you can read, like the Index on Economic Freedom, and the Economic Freedom of the World Index, and the Human Freedom Index, and it's great reading material. I can highly recommend it. So it tells you what the burden of taxes is, and what the burden of regulation is, what the burden of government is. It tells you to what extent you can trade freely, so those sorts of things. The extent to which the judiciary is independent, and to what extent you're free to use the currency you want. But what it doesn't tell you is how strictly are the rules enforced.
Mhm.
In Switzerland, for instance, is a country that has a very low burden of taxation compared to just about any other country in Western Europe or in the OECD. And it also has a very low burden of regulation. But the few rules that they do have are very strictly enforced. So for instance, if you speed just a little bit, you get this huge fine, and it's very strictly enforced. So in a way, it's very free because they don't have many rules and they don't have high taxes. But it's strictly enforced. So if you drive if you ride your motorcycle without a helmet in Switzerland, you'll be pulled over right away and be given a big fine. So there's that's something you should take into account as well. And well, the Mediterranean countries like Malta, like Cyprus, tend to have a lot of these soft freedoms. You can't find them in the law books, but you will discover down in life that the rules are not that strictly enforced. Yeah.
And how come, do you think?
Why would that be?
Yeah, more in the north it's more strict, and you know.
Why would that be? I think it's a good question. I've never been asked that question before, but I do think I have a theory. My theory is that in the north of Europe, there is this culture that says that it is very important to follow the rules, because if people didn't follow the rules, we would have chaos. We would have a bad situation, and it's not fair if there are rules and everybody should follow them, and the police should go after everyone that breaks the rules. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair. It's like it's a slave mentality. It's when if a slave has been naughty and he gets whipped. Mm-hmm. He doesn't get angry at the guy giving him the whip or his owner who makes the policy. He gets angry at the other slaves who are just as naughty but didn't get whipped. they should get whipped too. That's a slave mentality, you might say, and that's very common in the north of Europe. People are, for instance, when I was helping people avoid the draft, a lot of people say to me, "Well, if everybody was forced to go, then I wouldn't mind so much." But the fact that only a small percentage of the draftees are actually drafted, and the rest is just let go, that makes it to where I do not want to fulfill my military duty, because it's so unfair that some are forced and some are not.
Yeah. Is that a form of communist mentality under the citizens?
Well,
to think that way, like we have everyone the same, and
Well, I mean, the government wants people to be like this, because if people are like this, then they will rat on each other.
Mm-hmm.
They'll rat each other out. For instance, during COVID, it was illegal for people to invite haircutters to cut the hair at their homes. That was a hairdresser who was caught cutting someone's hair in their home could be fined thousands of euros, because it was illegal, because it could spread the virus. And then the government of the Netherlands had a special phone line you could call to rat on your neighbors. If you caught a hairdresser sneaking into your neighbor's home to cut the hair, you could call the number and say, I caught someone red-handed who's cutting hair.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Give them a fine.
NSB'ers, they call it in Dutch, yeah. How do you say NSB'ers in English?
Collaborators.
Collaborators, yeah, that's it. Wow.
Yeah. So, so for the government, this is beautiful. I mean, they don't have to pay these people. Like the police, they have to pay to enforce these rules. Mm-hmm. But now they have a whole army of volunteers. They're all...
Army of robots.
We're all collaborating. We're all helping them caught the people who are breaking the rules. So, that's part of what we're trained in schools, is to be like this. In the Soviet Union, it went so far that there were a couple of kids who were named heroes of the Soviet Union. Why? Because they ratted on their parents. Their parents were critical of the regime and had talked to each other about how bad the regime was. Their kids overheard them, and they were taught in school that it was a great honor and duty to rat on your parents, and they did. And the parents went to the camps, and the children were named the heroes of the Soviet Union. They were given medals and praised for their brave behavior.
Holy shit!
Yeah.
That goes very far.
Yeah, the same thing is happening in the United States with the war on drugs. That you have these cops visiting schools, telling kids that they should rat on their parents if their parents are using cannabis. Then, because it's changing now, because 1/3 of Americans now live in states that have legalized it, even recreationally. But there are still states where it's still illegal. Even medical marijuana is still illegal in some states. And the cops will then go visit the schools to tell the kids that they should tell on their parents. They should rat them out.
Yeah. And that's a good example of how the system uses rules to their own benefit. Because why would they legalize weed, for example? What is the true reason that they would legalize weed? For instance, in the Netherlands. In your opinion?
I think it's mostly just pressure from the public. The public is getting more common sense. Mm-hmm. And of course, the war on drugs has been a disaster in very many ways. Like alcohol prohibition used to be a disaster before that.
Yeah. During
alcohol prohibition in the United States between 1920 and 1932, the homicide rate went through the roof. The crime rate went through the roof. There were drive-by shootings, there was gang warfare, there was turf warfare, there were a lot of cops and prosecutors and judges that were taking bribes to protect the mobsters that were selling illegal alcohol, enforcing the laws against their competitors, and not the ones that were paying the bribes. And this was a complete disaster. And not only did people not drink that much less alcohol consumption did drop somewhat, but people still kept drinking alcohol. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people were going blind because, not just because brewing alcohol in a black market is usually not as safe. But
moonshine.
but the government was actually adding stuff to the alcohol that was very bad for your health. So you could still use alcohol for things like
to make it addictive.
cleaning windows and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But then the government made people put very unhealthy stuff in the alcohol that wasn't legal to sell, so that if you were to drink it, you would get sick or die or get blind. But a lot of people drank it anyway and did get blind or sick or die. So it was a complete disaster. And then in 1932, they changed the Constitution to legalize alcohol again. And you think they'd learned their lesson, but just a little later, the war on drugs began. And with the same, Milton Friedman once said, is one of the biggest mistakes that people make is to judge a government program by its intentions, not by their results. Now, the intention of the war on drugs might be good. You might think that drugs are bad for people, bad for your health, and therefore we should stop people from using it. I mean, I disagree that's a good idea. I think we should honor the right of every individual to decide for themselves what they think is good for them, what makes them happy or better off. Milton Friedman said, the government has no more right to tell me what to put in my mouth and what can come out of my mouth. And I completely agree with that. But apart from the moral argument that we should have an individual autonomy, individuals should be able to decide themselves what's good for them, there's the results of the war on drugs. And the results are that the crime rate has gone through the roof again, the homicide rate has gone through the roof again. The number of people that killed through overdose is very high because of the war on drugs, because what happens is, because it's illegal, a lot of the drugs that are being sold are not pure. They're very unpure. But as a customer on a black market, you don't know what you're buying. You don't know how pure or impure it is. Mm-hmm. So if you think you're buying something that's about as pure as you would expect in average, but somebody sells you very pure stuff, then you take an overdose and you die. So it's actually, these people dying are as a result of the war on drugs. Yeah. And it's a complete fantasy that the government can actually stop people from using drugs. The government can't even keep the drugs out of its own prisons. So if they can't keep drugs out of their own prisons, how are they going to stop people in the whole country from using them? Even if they turn the whole country into a prison, which is what they've been trying to do, which it can't do, but they've been trying, certainly. I mean, the rule of law has been eradicated because of it. The protections that used to exist for people that are suspects of a crime, they've gone out the window, and still people keep using drugs. So they're not achieving the goal that they say they want to achieve.
They've done some experiments, like for example in Portugal, I don't know when or whatever, but they legalized every drug, so also the hard drugs, and they saw that the use of drugs was getting lower after that.
That is true. They didn't completely legalize it, they decriminalized it. The difference is they don't prosecute the users anymore. And they don't punish the users anymore. They still prosecute and punish the
dealers, let's say.
The producers and the sellers.
Yeah, okay.
So it's a good step in the right direction, certainly, to stop prosecuting and punishing the users. But in the United States, it's usually one or the other. So either everybody gets prosecuted or nobody gets prosecuted. So when the states that have legalized cannabis for recreational use in the United States, they don't just legalize it for the users, they also legalize it for the traders and the producers. So that's a better approach, I would say.
Don't you think there is also a layer that we do not see? Like, for instance, business that's been done between corrupt governments and, for instance, types like Pablo Escobar, if you really dive deep into the
obviously
to the real story,
because of the drug war, drugs are expensive. A lot more expensive than they'd otherwise be. I mean, alcohol used to be very expensive during Prohibition as well, a lot cheaper now.
Yeah.
So because it's illegal, it's very expensive. Because it's very expensive, you can make a lot of money producing it and selling it. Because you can make a lot of money that the top drug producers and the people at the top of the drug business tend to be extremely wealthy. made wealthy by the war on drugs, by the government basically. And what they typically will do is they will pay not just policemen and prosecutors and judges, but also politicians to go after the other guys, go after the competition, go after them. So as a result, the war on drugs leads to mass corruption. So, I mean, there used to be a time in La Belle Époque, let's say, between 1815 and 1914, when the West was pretty free, when we had small governments, we had low taxes, we had freedom of travel, there were hardly any passports, we had free trade, there were no trade restrictions. That was the golden age of the West. And in those days, because the government was so small, policemen would usually go after burglars and murderers and rapists and thieves, not after people who do no harm to other people. So during those days, the cops and the police and the prosecutors and the judges got a lot of respect because they typically went after the bad guys. And they earned the respect in those days. I mean, no society was ever perfect. There were always problems. There were still corrupt people, and there was no perfectly free society then. But compared to now, it was a lot better then. And I think that's also part of the explanation why in the north of Europe and in North America, it's part of the explanation why people tend to be more rule-following, more obedient, because that tradition, it came into existence in those days when, in general, the laws and rules were not that bad, and it was sort of a good idea to follow them.
Yeah.
And whereas in the south of Europe, I mean, the government has always been bad and corrupt and horrible, so they've never had respect for the government or the laws. So that's why they have this tradition of disregarding them.
May I share my vision on that?
Sure.
What I see is that in the north, everything is very centralized.
Yeah.
So we do not really have communities anymore, like villages. They all are now part of the bigger city or whatever, because we have, like the Netherlands, for example, is a small country. Now it's one big village, right? Very well connected, etc., society-wise. And my experience in southern countries is that this community vibe is still very alive. The government is really more on the back seat, and the citizens, like the people, are in the front row.
Yeah, they don't trust their governments. They don't expect much from their governments.
Exactly. Yeah.
And as a result, the bonds between relatives tend to be stronger.
Yeah.
So people tend to trust their relatives and tend to take care of their relatives and be taken care of by their relatives. And in most of the welfare states these days, government has taken over that role. So it used to be, before we had a welfare state, if you got old and sick and you couldn't take care of yourself anymore, you would probably be taken care of by your children and grandchildren because you took care of them when they were young. And this was the system at the time. This was the culture. This was normal. The relatives take care of each other. There was no need to have a government in that system. There was no need for high taxes in that system. But then in the course of the 20th century, government started growing, started raising taxes, started giving handouts, and that's changed now. So now most people don't take care of their relatives anymore. We expect the government to do that.
And cultures are destroyed as well, because we see that as if in the Netherlands, for example, you can see it as a glass of wine. The wine is the culture. If you put in lots of water in the wine, the culture becomes sort of weakened, And normally culture is given over to next generations. And this is where we come back to education, for example, And now we see mass migration, so many cultures coming into one country, which also impacts the Dutch culture. And I'm not only talking about the Dutch, I'm also talking about other countries. For instance, we saw the same in France, for example, It's now part of the region. For example, in south of France, we had lots of Arabs coming from Morocco, working there and living there, and now it's part of the culture, But it does impact the culture little by little, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But what I see in the Netherlands is there's so many cultures, and now you also have the indoctrination of the LGBTQ propaganda, etc. I don't know. It's sort of Big Brother who gives out the rules and the blankets, as it were. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I find it difficult to explain. It's a feeling that I have when I'm in the Netherlands. It's like people don't think for themselves anymore.
Yeah,
that's a big problem.
Well, I mean, our schools don't teach our kids how to think, but what to think.
Yeah.
And
what to remember, etc. How to remember. Yeah.
And that's a big difference. I think there, in La Belle Époque, 1815, 1914, people had more common sense. And then the government started forcing us to take our kids to their schools. And that's been going on for 5-6 generations now. And every generation, it gets the madness gets a little bit worse. Mm-hmm. And common sense goes just a little bit more out the window. Because it's an ongoing process. You can compare it to the difference between the Soviet Union and the rest of Eastern Europe. So the Soviet Union, there was communism for 75 years. In the rest of Eastern Europe, there was communism for 44 years. That means that in Eastern Europe, when the communism ended, there were still people alive who remembered what things were like before communism, who had skills that they learned before communism. In the Soviet Union, all those people had already died, or almost all of them, or they were either dead or they were sold, that they couldn't really participate in society anymore, or in business anymore. So the knowledge had just disappeared pretty much in the Soviet Union. I think that's part of the reason why Russia today is so much worse off than the rest of Eastern Europe. Like the Baltics, they didn't become communist until World War II, when they were conquered by the Soviet Union. But until then, they've been very prosperous, developed, free countries at a very high level. And after the communists were forced out, they started to grow very quickly. Estonia is now a wealthy country, and it does very well. It has a lot of economic freedom, a lot of economic growth. It has very little debt. It's a great place now. Russia is still a hellhole. I think part of the reason is this reason that the people with common sense had all died basically in the Soviet Union. The culture, the government has a huge impact on culture. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can tell that between if you study the difference between the East and Western Germans, or between the North and the South Koreans, or the Chinese in China versus the Chinese in Hong Kong and Singapore and Taiwan. I mean, these are all historical examples, almost controlled experiments, where a country was separated into two halves with a border in the middle, with very little contact for many decades. And on one side of the border, there was a lot of freedom, comparably. And the other half of the border, the other side of the border, there was tyranny, and totalitarianism, and there was hunger, and there was corruption. People became rude, and became collaborators with the regime, and that has a huge impact on the culture. So before the border was there was hardly any difference. I mean, there was the same mentality, the same culture, the same level of education, same level of prosperity. And then after 40 years of having a border separate these two halves of these peoples, there are huge differences in culture. And that is evidence just how big the impact of government is on the culture, on mentality, and it takes time for that to disappear. I mean, East Germany's become a lot freer than it used to be, but still, there are still differences in culture between East Germans and West Germans. Also, China has become less totalitarian, less tyrannical than it used to be. The last decade, it's getting in the wrong direction again. But from the death of Mao until about 10 years ago, usually the steps taken were in the right direction of more freedom and smaller government. And of course, it was absolutely horrible under Mao, so they had a long way to go from where they started. But they did take steps in the right direction, which is why the economy grew so fast. But even so, there are still huge differences in culture between the Chinese in China and the Chinese in Hong Kong or Singapore or Taiwan, because their culture has not been ruined by communism.
Yeah.
So it's this is the closest thing we'll probably ever have to a controlled experiment among real life human beings. And well, the conclusion is freedom is good for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Tyranny is very bad for you.
But people tend to be afraid of freedom. You know, it's like a bird cage that you open.
Yeah.
The bird will stay in the cage most of the time because it's afraid of freedom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we are really in a transition right now within the world when we talk about these global powers. You know, America, Russia, China, Europe. And of course we see like sort of black and white, yin and yang. But I find it very exciting because there are so many opportunities for people like you and me, but also our viewers, when they stop focusing on where the government says you have to focus on, you know, start looking the other way, because crypto, for example, we're going towards a bull market, in my opinion. This is not financial advice, of course, but I've been in crypto for now 7 years.
Yeah.
I've seen 2 bull markets, some bear markets as well, which was very frustrating, but also very, let's say, I've learned a lot from these periods. And I see what is happening, for example, with Russia, China, and all these countries, and the BRICS countries, right? They want to dump the dollar, and I give them, I would say, like, hoe zeg je dat ook weer in Nederlands? Want ik geef ze gelijk.
I can't blame them.
I can't blame them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because like America had the power with the dollar, you know. And now they are printing and printing and printing, and it's devaluating everything that's connected with it. You know, everything that touches it dies right now. And I think it's very normal that Russia, for example, is creating its own financial system. You know, with all the other countries, and this is going to have a big impact on crypto as well. For people who are alert and invest their money wisely, can create generational wealth in the coming 10 years, you know, because we are also seeing a technological boom, like AI, for instance. I've started using it more and more. What about you? Do you use this new technology? Have you tested these new technologies already, or not yet?
I haven't used AI that much yet. No, a little bit, but I am interested in it, and I would like to spend some time getting more acquainted with it. But I've been very busy over the last especially the last year or so. So ever since ChatGPT came out, I've been sort of too busy to really get a lot of experience with it. But I am interested, and I do think it is probably on net a good thing, which is true for most new technologies. They can all be abused. They can all be used by bad people for bad things. That's true for That's true from the common kitchen knife to any type of car. Anything that moves, anything you can use for something, you can use for a bad thing too.
Yeah.
But it is my opinion that in general, the pros outweigh the cons.
Yeah, definitely. And you have to try things out, you know.
Yeah.
Wat de boer niet kent, eet hij niet.
Yeah.
So what the farmer doesn't know, he doesn't eat.
Correct.
That's a poor man's mindset, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So if you want to reach certain levels of success in your life, you have to go out of your comfort zone and also start to learn new things. What we do every day, of course. Yeah. But I found it interesting because within our community, for example, we look at that kind of opportunities, how we can use AI, for instance, for so many things. You can use it for health. You can use it for example, your consulting business. It could help you with booking your bookings, doing your administration, and even give you ideas. You can have full conversations with this robot, for example, that you can educate yourself, right? And it's really fun. I sometimes use it for example, my website, or also for trading. You can use it for trading strategies, of course. My videos. There's more and more possible with this technology. And of course, we've seen Elon Musk with his brain chip, with which you will be able to telepathically communicate through, for example, WhatsApp or whatever, Yeah. I believe we can still do this also without the chip. So in this transition, you will see people go more to the sort of transhumanism part of evolution, and you will see people more starting to use AI in an intelligent way to go back to nature, actually, and decentralize power as well, which I would really like to be able to facilitate for people within the tribe, is that everyone can create its own world, its own decentralized community in which we really connect with one another, It's not just like, sending a letter to the government and waiting for their privilege to come back, right? It's, no, I see you, you see me, I am you and you are me. That's what I believe. We are all mirrors for one another, Yeah. Sorry, sometimes I go very far.
Okay. You asked me what we can do to change the world for the better, and I answered one part of that question, which is what can you do as an individual to make your own life better, which is usually to move to a better place. There's another thing you can do, which is find loopholes. Find loopholes in the law that help you achieve your objectives. No legal system is perfect. There are always ways around you can find to do what you want to do without breaking the law. So that's actually one of the things I do professionally, is to find loopholes, mostly in tax laws, and help people use them. Another thing you can do is do business with people who share your values. Start friendships with people who share your values. Find a life partner who shares your values. That's a good way to increase your freedom, because
difficult one.
Because if you are involved with people who do not share your values, they're going to pressure you to be someone you're not. If everyone around you is like that, you're not. That's one way to reduce your freedom. So one way to increase your freedom is find people who value you for who you are, who share your values. Then you can be yourself. And they'll appreciate you for who you are. So that's one way to increase your freedom in a way. Another thing that you can do if you want to change society, which is very, very hard to do, there are not very many people who are good at that. Milton Friedman was good at it, Hayek was good at it, but there's a few exceptions, people who have been very influential, but it's hard to achieve that. If you can, then more power to you, literally.
Everything is possible.
But I think if you want to do that, I think it's a smart thing to be realistic about what you can achieve as an individual, because if you have very broad expectations that you're going to change the world, you're going to be disappointed soon and burn out. And therefore, I think it's wise to realize that most of what you can do is you can change your own life. You can change the people you deal with, you work with, you hang out with, and you can change the surroundings. You can change the country you're in. But to change society at large means changing millions and millions of people's minds. That's hard to do. If you want to try it anyway because you enjoy it, it's your hobby, it's a challenge, then go ahead. I've enjoyed it. It's my hobby. Like other people will dance for hobby or collect stamps for hobby. So my hobby is spreading my views, spreading my ideas. And if you want to do that, then you need to find what you're best at. If you're good at speaking in public, and if you're good at it and you're appreciated for it and you enjoy it, that's what you should do. If you're a good writer, write. If you are better in a one-on-one conversation with your family and friends, that's change hearts one person at a time. That you can try that. If you're the kind of person who's well at organizing stuff, organize meetings, events, seminars, and use your talents in a way that you can help the cause of liberty. Not everybody should be doing the same thing. Find out what you like and what you're good at, and do it.
That's a beautiful vision.
Furthermore, one advantage of joining a movement, and I'm not saying becoming a member and listen to your leader, but I mean, if you surround yourself with people who work, who have a similar vision and want to work with you to achieve the same vision, it's probably a good place to find new friends, and it's probably a good place to find new business partners and people to work with. It's probably a good place to find a life partner.
Definitely.
So it's not just a hobby; it's also a way to find people who can make your life better.
Yeah, that's also the vision that I share with you. Is surround yourself with like-minded individuals, and when you are on a high frequency, you will get so much more energy, inspiration, and beautiful things will happen. Yeah. Just like this first conversation we had.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying you should never expose yourself to people who have different ideas from yours. I mean, that can be a learning experience too. But if the views that you have are pretty much the mainstream views, then you've got a lot to learn from people who are not mainstream.
Yeah.
However, if you've discovered that the mainstream is not for you, and you found a group of people who share your values, then that's a treasure that you should take advantage of.
I think this was a beautiful conversation. It was very diverse, and I hope we can do this another time again.
Sure.
And thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And did you like the interview? Well, then let us know by commenting underneath this video. And make sure to subscribe to my channel, because we are probably going to have a second conversation with Toine in the near future. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the higher you go, the further you can see. I hope to welcome you soon within our tribe. Sincerely yours, Robin, just like the bird.